Thank you very much, Minister, for the comprehensive post-cabinet briefing. We are going to take questions inside the House and then check the online questions. May I see by an indication of a hand if we have any questions inside? The drill is the same. You will identify yourself and the media house and then straight to your questions. Thank you.
I need to get my pen.
Good morning, Presidency Ntshavheni. My name is Presidency from ENCA. I have two simple and quick questions. The first one is on the NHI. The presidency, I think 2-3 days ago, issued out a statement indicating that they have requested Business Unity South Africa following a meeting with a delegation from the organization to submit proposals that will further enhance engagements and discussions over unhappiness around NHI by other sectors of our society. But also, a similar question relates to the delayed implementation of the Bella Act, particularly those two specific clauses. My question, therefore, is, given the fact that the President has already signed those particular bills into Acts of Parliament, what is the purpose of this further consultations? Because my little understanding, and I stand to be corrected here, is that once an act or a bill becomes an act of Parliament, it doesn't depend on the President as an individual to amend an act that is already a law. It would take a whole process of consulting, going back to Parliament and all that. What is the President trying to seeking to achieve by consulting on a law that is already in place? Yeah.
Good morning, Zineko Mhlaba from Newsroom Africa. Minister, you spoke about a structure, or if I'm using the right word, that has been set up by the President in terms of managing disagreement in the GNU platform or among GNU partners. Can you give us more details on what inspired that? And a follow-up to that, did Cabinet discuss, how political parties, especially in the GNU, handled communication on the issues of the Bella Bill, especially with the Democratic Alliance members publicly saying that they will not attend? So my question in that regard is that, is the Cabinet worried about the powers of the President as the head of the executive in terms of holding members of the executive, such as the Minister of Basic Education, in terms of the handling and the communication of that issue? Secondly, on the issues of the measures that have been put in place to assist municipalities who are underperforming, can you give us more details about the interventions that you just mentioned in your statement right now that are meant to assist those municipalities? If I can throw in a last question, a third question. On the issues of international relations, the US has said it supports South Africa or the African continent getting to permanent seats in the Security Council, but without the veto powers. Can the Cabinet give us a comment on that? But also the passing now of or the vote, the overwhelming support the vote got in terms of condemning Israel and calling on it to ensure that it implements the issues that were raised in terms of ensuring that it desists from attacking Palestine. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. We will seek your guidance on the questions that have been asked here. I think 4 are also online, though with a different angle. Okay, thank you very much.
to take my cabinet fine because of the details. Just give me a minute so that I can deal with the question on the IMC in particular. Thank you. Excuse me for the delay. I was trying to find the documentation to deal with the question. I'll plead then to that I come back to the issue around the IMC when I deal with the second round of questions so that I don't delay the responding of these questions. I'll start with the issues raised by Moloko Moloto of ENCA on the BUSA proposals. It's not BUSA proposals. So BUSA wrote a letter, a very long letter, complaining about anything and everything about NHI. And then the president opted to engage BUSA into a meeting with the Minister of Health. And in that meeting, there was nothing specific that BUSA was saying was wrong with the NHI. And the scrapping of the NHI is not on the table, and it won't be on the table. NHI is law in South Africa. Unlike when we're dealing with the Bila Act, where there are two issues that are issues of contention, which is the language and admissions. So therefore, in the meeting between BUSA, President and Minister of Health, the decision was BUSA must go back and come with specific issues that they have problems with in the NHI. Because BUSA cannot argue that they have a problem with universal access to health in South Africa, because it's part of the provisions of the NHI. Because so you can't generalize and say repeal the act. The act is law; it can't be repealed. So tell us what is the problem. So that is the request. And when BUSA has specified what are the issues they have, there will then be an engagement to clarify that process. And this is because we have always held an argument that says NHI is good for all of us, but there may be differences in the tactical implementation of the NHI. So we then need to clarify each other on the technicalities of that implementation. For instance, we all agree all South Africans have to have access to quality health care. That's one. To have all South Africans having access to quality health care, it means, one, we need all infrastructure, health infrastructure in South Africa to be up to scratch. It will mean Chilizini Hospital in Thohoyandou must have an IC unit similar to an IC unit that is at Unitas Hospital. Because all of us need access to that health care. It will mean all tertiary and referral hospitals must meet a standard of and the norms that are required in that infrastructure. That's one. Secondly, we'll all acknowledge that even if you've got the infrastructure, but without professional health workers being available, if the ratio of doctors to patients in rural hospital is 1 to 2005, that is not sustainable. So it will mean all of us, we agree, there must be health professionals that are trained and made available to provide health care in our hospitals. So those things, everybody agree. And then there has been a debate about medical aid, non-medical aid. Government itself has a medical aid called GEMS. People forget. Is that how do we use that, those medical aid? Because currently, if Muluko, me and you come from the same province, literally we come from the same home. But me and you know that if I get involved in an accident, the first thing people are going to look for before they look of stabilizing me, and even yourself, it's whether I have a medical aid so that they can take me to Mediclinic or to Netcare, Puluso. Doctors will not get there to stabilize me. If they take me to Mediclinic Mediclinic, their job will be to say we're stabilizing her and push her out in a trolley to Polokwane Hospital. Whether my being moved out of that will threaten my life, they do not care. And I'm just using that example that me and you have experienced it. And we have cases that both of us had to contend with. One case I think we dealt with, spoke to each other when there was an incident of a mutual person. But that is the impact. So can we say people must not have access to health because they are not able to pay for that facility that they must be treated at? So those are the technicalities that must be sorted. So BUSA must go back and narrow down what are their issues so that they can be explained, whether be dealt with in the mechanism of rollout. Then you ask the related question to say these things are law and you can't suspend the operation of law unless you do it through a parliamentary process. Yes, that's why the President is clear on the Bila Act, to say there are 3 months. That 3 months is to clarify the issues around language and admission. And the admission issue is to say, schools are saying, more especially the Afrikaner schools, and I'll give an example with where I stay. I stay next to Constantia Life School. My child goes to another school. I would prefer my child going to Constantia Life School because Constantia Life School is 3 minutes, literally 3 minutes from my house by driving, and 10 minutes most on foot. So I don't have, my child can literally, like I did when I was younger, can literally walk to school unaccompanied if he's at Constantia Clove Lyre School, which I'll pay very affordable school fees. But I'm forced to take my child further away and put my child now leaves home at 6:45 so that he can be at school at 7:30. That's one. Secondly, I pay very exorbitant fees for my child to be there because that's where they're teaching English. But the issue is, when the Bela Act has come into law now, will Constantia Lyre School be able to provide quality education in English from January, I can't remember when is the first day of school in 2025, for my child who I want to move there? So those are the discussions to say, is the mechanisms, again, is the technicality of implementation. Again, with the language policy, is the question of how do we veto. And I'm saying I live within the vicinity of Constantia Clove, and I can get you 40, 50 neighbors who all of us, if not more, are English, and we're not English speakers. I'm Venda, but English is a common language of denomination. But we're not able to access that school. That infrastructure is great, but we're forced to go out. So those are the things you need to clarify. Are you clarifying it? How you are clarifying it at the mechanism of implementation to say, what does it mean? What is the infrastructure that has to be provided for the additional intake that comes in? So that's why it's a 3-month period of engagement, which will be clarified with the parties. And then Zinyiko Mhlaba then asks, what is this mechanism? It's not a structure, it's a mechanism, a clearinghouse mechanism to deal with, and it avoids what in the media would say are differences where there have not been differences. We sit in cabinet, we agree in a whole lot of things. There are reservations that are explained, but there are things that we agree and move forward. Since the GNU has come into effect, there's not been reservations on all decisions of cabinet. We have all agreed. But to make sure, and the issues that have been deemed as issues of differences, the Bila Act now and the NHI Act, there have been differences before the GNU. And the engagement, we always tease them, the now new members in government, in cabinet, to say, you know, it's easy to be, they say it was easy to be in opposition than to be governing. And I think Minister Mackenzie has gone public to say, actually the misunderstandings we've had were intentional, not because we wanted to listen to each other, we wanted just to be in opposition. He said that in public, but because that's the essence. So most of the things that you are deeming as differences are things that could, if we're working together in the 6th administration, both the governing party then and the opposition parties, we could have cleared in terms of implementation mechanism. But currently, to make sure that in future there are no issues, and you'll be saying, and then you raise an issue of the minister who was not, who did not attend the signing of the Bela Act. into an act by the president. And we have clarified it in cabinet. There are no DA ministers. There's only Minister of the State. We all are appointed and account to the President of the Republic. We serve at his pleasure. He can invite us or disinvite us into his cabinet. That is very clear. I would not want to deal with whether the minister would have explained herself to the president. But we are not worried about the powers of the president. The powers of the president are enshrined in the Constitution. They cannot be watered down by any political arrangement, because if the powers of the president are watered down, therefore the president is failing to execute his duties as mandated and required by the Constitution of the Republic. So that's how we are. And on the U.S. position around Africa's representation in the Security Council, but without veto rights, South Africa's position has been clear. We want the full and meaningful transformation of the United Nations institutions and system, not some accommodation that are appeasing but without real power. So the position of South Africa is that we want full and meaningful transformation of the United Nations system and institutions in its totality, including the World Trade Organization, including the IMF and the World Bank. So it's not our issue is not about just the UN, but they cannot be. It's not about the United Security Council. There cannot be a Security Council membership without veto rights. That is not meaningful. All countries are equal and all countries are sovereign. So if we participate in a structure, we must continue to participate as sovereigns and as equal partners. There is no undermining of the African continent that will be acceptable to South Africa. And I'll come back on the IMC in terms of the details that you want. Thank you.
All right, so those are live visuals coming to you from Pretoria. Quite a comprehensive update from Minister in the Presidency there, Khumbudzo Ntshavheni, who's given us the outcomes of the latest cabinet meeting. There was a lot being said, but I've just highlighted what I think are 2 or 3 points that are worth rehashing for you. The first is that there's been a slight uptick in the Mpox cases. We're now sitting with 25 confirmed infections in the country. The minister telling us that an additional case has been alerted, or they've been alerted of an additional case. And off the back of that, they're actually making an official call to South Africans to start implementing those non-pharmaceutical interventions in order to make sure that we are curbing the further spread of this disease. In the same breath, the minister, though, saying they're not necessarily concerned about how it's spreading in the country. In other words, it's still under control. Another development that you might have missed, actually, Cabinet approving the phasing out of a number of emergency lines, including 10111. It's the only emergency line I learned when I was at school. But apparently there's also 10177 and a third line. And essentially the thinking here is that they're going to do away with these different phone numbers and create a single line where you simply dial 112 for any kind of emergency. The thinking here is that people don't have to memorize different lines for different emergencies, and hopefully this will lead to them getting some kind of speedy resolution in the case of an emergency. So very interesting that apparently we're still at the public comment or public consultation stages of that particular process, a story I think we should certainly keep watching for you. And then there was also mention of the level 1 water restrictions that are currently in place in Gauteng, the province apparently contributing immensely to the country's water disruptions. The minister putting this down to a number of issues that we've certainly covered on the show, including the ongoing infrastructure backlogs, at least maintenance backlogs, and the deteriorating state of the infrastructure in Gauteng. Hopefully the rains that are predicted between today and tomorrow will help. But Rand Water, for example, implementing those restrictions because they're starting to really feel the pressure of increased demand. And then towards the end there, the minister mentioning that some parties in the GNU apparently are conceding that it was much easier to be in the opposition benches. In other words, she's insinuating that now that they are in governance, they are feeling the heat. And this was off the back of a question asked by a media colleague about whether or not the minister, I beg your pardon, the president, is going to do anything in response to Basic Education Minister Khumbudzo Ntshavheni snubbing the signing of what is now the Bella Act. Khumbudzo Ntshavheni emphasizing that as far as they're concerned, there are no DA ministers, but there are only, ministers that serve at the behest of the president. You've heard that term quite a few times. I haven't heard any of these ministers conceding that it was easier to be in the opposition benches, but it's, I suppose, interesting and worth keeping in mind the next time we engage any of them about whether or not this is a sentiment that they are likely to back. There are still more questions being asked in Pretoria. We'll continue listening into that media briefing for you throughout the course of the morning. But really, those are the salient points. I mean, otherwise, she spoke about Cabinet welcoming the economic indicators that we're seeing, improved sentiment, manufacturing outlook certainly better, inflation on the decline, a number of people arrested as part of Operation Shanela. They've welcomed the most recent bilateral meeting they had in China. You might remember that. We covered quite extensively for you, and are also seeing through the repatriation process of a number of freedom fighters, at least those who died in Zimbabwe and Zambia. So stick around. If there's anything else worth mentioning, we'll certainly bring it to you here on the SABC News Channel.